The cameras were rolling when Joel Osteen, the polished televangelist known for controlling every word in his arena, found himself sharing the stage with Senator John Kennedy. The event was meant to be a carefully orchestrated conversation, but Kennedy had a reputation for speaking his mind, and not backing down. As soon as Kennedy began raising questions that cut through Osteen's carefully built image, Osteen shifted uncomfortably. He leaned toward his team, motioned to security, and tried to talk over Kennedy with polished phrases about unity and faith. The tension was obvious. Every time Kennedy opened his mouth, Osteen would interrupt, determined to steer the discussion back to a safe, rehearsed narrative. But Kennedy wasn't rattled. Instead, he paused, adjusted his glasses, and waited for the crowd to quiet. Then, with a calm but firm tone, he dropped a pointed statement that sent the room into silence. He laid out facts, exposed contradictions, and reminded everyone that leadership wasn't about silencing critics, it was about answering the hard questions. The crowd erupted. Some gasped, others applauded, and Osteen's polished smile froze as Kennedy delivered one last line that echoed across the hall like a gavel. Osteen had tried to silence him, but Kennedy had flipped the moment on its head. Within hours, clips of the exchange spread online, sparking debate across the nation. Osteen's attempt to control the narrative had backfired, and Kennedy's words had gone viral. The tension in the room didn't fade after Kennedy's sharp words, it only grew thicker. Osteen, visibly unsettled, forced a laugh and tried to smooth things over with one of his trademark lines about positivity. But the audience wasn't buying it. They had just witnessed something raw and unscripted, and all eyes were now fixed on Kennedy. Kennedy leaned forward on the podium, his voice low but firm. With all due respect, Reverend, this isn't about who can talk the longest. It's about who's willing to tell the truth. His words cut through the room like a blade, leaving no room for Osteen to slip back into his rehearsed comfort zone. Osteen gestured to the moderator, hoping for rescue, but Kennedy wasn't done. He calmly listed examples where people felt misled by polished speeches and empty promises, contrasting them with the real struggles of everyday families. The crowd shifted in their seats, some nodding, some whispering. It was clear that Osteen had tried to silence Kennedy, but now it looked like he had handed him the stage instead. Kennedy's calm defiance only made Osteen's attempts at control seem smaller, more desperate. The cameras zoomed in, capturing Osteen's uneasy smile and Kennedy's unwavering expression. The clash was no longer just about words, it was about authenticity versus image, and Kennedy was winning that battle. The moderator finally tried to step in, urging both men to stay on topic. But Kennedy wasn't flustered, he simply raised a hand, signaling he would finish his thought. The audience hushed again, sensing that something big was about to be said. Kennedy leaned closer to the mic. People don't come here to be entertained with slogans. They come here because they're looking for answers. Real answers. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of experience and conviction. Osteen's expression tightened. He countered with a smile and a soft, measured tone, saying, "Senator, people also come here for hope. They don't want politics clouding their faith." The line might have worked on another stage, but not this one. Kennedy adjusted his glasses, glanced at the crowd, and replied, "Hope without honesty is just another sales pitch. And the people of this country deserve more than that." The crowd reacted immediately. Applause thundered through the hall, drowning out Osteen's attempt to respond. For the first time, Osteen's carefully curated control slipped, and Kennedy stood there calm, collected, and commanding. The cameras caught everything, and the clip was already making its way online. This wasn't just a disagreement, it was turning into a defining clash. The applause seemed to shake Osteen more than Kennedy's words. He shifted in his chair, reaching for a glass of water, but his hand trembled slightly. The cameras zoomed in, catching every detail. The man who usually commanded stadiums with flawless confidence now looked cornered. Kennedy waited for the noise to fade, then spoke with deliberate calm. "Joel, I respect what you've built. But the problem is when people mistake a polished performance for real leadership. Leadership means being accountable, not untouchable. The line landed like a hammer. The room went dead silent. Even those who had been whispering before were now frozen, staring at the senator. Osteen forced a smile and tried to laugh it off, but the crowd didn't join in. Instead, they were waiting to see what Kennedy would say next. And Kennedy delivered. Trying to silence someone doesn't erase the truth. It only makes people wonder what you're afraid of. The audience gasped. Some clapped, others shouted in agreement, and even the moderator seemed caught off guard. Osteen's composure cracked further, his smile now stiff, his usual control slipping further out of reach. In that moment, it was clear, Osteen had tried to silence Kennedy, but instead, he had given him the loudest microphone in the room. The tension in the hall had reached its peak. Osteen tried to regain footing, flashing his trademark smile and lifting his voice to reclaim control. "Senator Kennedy," he said, "we're here to inspire, not to argue. People want uplifting words, not confrontations." Kennedy didn't flinch. He stepped closer to the podium, his voice carrying like a gavel strike. "Inspiration without truth is just decoration. Pretty words won't pay the bills, won't fix a broken system, and won't help the families struggling every single day." The audience erupted. Cheers and applause echoed through the venue, louder than anything Osteen had received that night. The cameras panned across the crowd, people were nodding, clapping, even standing. Kennedy then leaned into the mic, delivering the line that would go viral within hours. "Joel, you can silence a microphone, but you can't silence accountability." The room froze for a split second, then exploded. The crowd roared, journalists scribbled frantically, and even the moderator seemed unable to contain the energy in the room. Osteen's carefully built composure shattered in that moment. He had tried to silence Kennedy, but Kennedy had turned it into the most powerful statement of the night. The roar of the crowd didn't fade quickly. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering as if they had just witnessed history unfold in front of them. Osteen tried to smile, but the cameras caught the stiffness in his face. The man who usually commanded arenas with ease was suddenly the one struggling to hold ground. The moderator attempted to shift the discussion back on track, but it was too late. Kennedy had seized the moment, and everyone knew it. He didn't gloat, he didn't raise his voice, he simply stood calm, letting the weight of his words do the work. "Folks," Kennedy said slowly, "when truth makes someone uncomfortable, that's usually a sign it needed to be said." The audience broke into another wave of applause. Journalists in the press section exchanged looks, already aware that this clip would dominate headlines by morning. The energy was electric, the kind of atmosphere that signaled something bigger than just a debate. This was the kind of exchange that shaped narratives. Meanwhile, Osteen shuffled his notes, searching for a way to recover. But every polished phrase now sounded hollow compared to Kennedy's sharp clarity. The harder he tried, the more obvious it became, the balance of power in the room had completely shifted. And in that moment, Osteen realized, he hadn't silenced Kennedy. He had elevated him. Even as the moderator tried to regain order, dozens of audience members already had their phones out. Clips of Kennedy's line, "You can silence a microphone, but you can't silence accountability," were being posted to social media in real time. Within minutes, hashtags were trending. Back on stage, Osteen attempted to push forward, his voice steady but strained. "Senator, I think we can agree that unity matters most." Kennedy nodded politely, then replied with the precision of a surgeon, "Unity without accountability isn't unity. It's silence dressed up as peace." The audience gasped, then burst into applause once again. This time, the cheering was so loud the moderator had no choice but to let it ride. Behind the scenes, producers watching the broadcast feed knew they had just captured a viral moment. Journalists were already tweeting, headlines were being drafted, and Kennedy's calm defiance was spreading faster than Osteen's polished image could keep up. The power in the room had shifted entirely. Osteen had tried to frame the conversation, but Kennedy had reframed it into a public reckoning. And the crowd, both in the hall and online, knew who had just won the exchange. Outside the walls of the venue, the storm had already begun. News anchors cut into their regular programming as clips of the exchange flooded social media feeds. Headlines rolled in almost instantly: Kennedy shuts down Osteen on live stage, mic silencing backfires, accountability goes viral. Commentators on both sides scrambled to react. Some praised Kennedy's composure, noting how he turned Osteen's attempt at control into a lesson on truth. Others criticized Osteen for underestimating the senator and walking straight into a public relations disaster. Meanwhile, inside the hall, Osteen looked visibly rattled. He tried to flash his usual smile, but the applause for Kennedy drowned out every carefully chosen word. The cameras, unforgiving in their focus, made the contrast undeniable. One man was holding steady, the other was unraveling. Kennedy, however, remained calm, even humble. He didn't raise his voice or gloat. Instead, he leaned into the mic and said, "This was never about me. It's about the people who deserve to be heard, not silenced." The audience erupted again, this time louder than before. It wasn't just a clash anymore, it was a moment that defined the night. And outside the hall, the internet was already ensuring it would be remembered for far longer than that. By the time the event ended, the real battle had already shifted to the media. Networks rolled out emergency panels, replaying the clip again and again. Kennedy's steady delivery and Osteen's flustered reaction were dissected frame by frame, with analysts pointing out the exact moment the tide turned. On one channel, a commentator smirked, "You could almost see the color drain from Osteen's face when Kennedy dropped that line. That was the knockout punch." Another panelist added, "What makes it powerful isn't just what Kennedy said, it's how calm he was while Osteen tried to shut him down. It made Osteen look defensive, while Kennedy looked unshakable." Clips of the exchange were already dominating every platform. Millions of views poured in within hours. Memes, hashtags, and even parody videos surfaced, amplifying the story even further. Kennedy's words had gone beyond politics, they had become cultural. Meanwhile, Osteen's team scrambled to draft statements, trying to spin the narrative. But every time they released a polished line, Kennedy's raw and unfiltered moment outshined it. The people weren't talking about Osteen's slogans. They were repeating Kennedy's one-liners. And as dawn approached, one thing was clear: Osteen had tried to silence Kennedy, but Kennedy had spoken so powerfully that the world refused to stop listening. By the next morning, the fallout was undeniable. Joel Osteen's inbox was flooded, his phone ringing non-stop. Supporters who once praised his flawless delivery were now demanding answers. Some questioned why he had tried to cut Kennedy off in the first place. Others admitted they were embarrassed by how defensive he looked on stage. Inside his circle, panic set in. Advisors urged him to clarify his intentions, but every draft statement sounded hollow compared to Kennedy's words that were still echoing across the country. Osteen's brand had always relied on control of the stage, the message, and the image. But now, control was the very thing slipping away. Meanwhile, Kennedy was everywhere. News shows invited him on to discuss the exchange, clips of his calm clapback were looping non-stop, and talk radio hosts replayed his words as callers cheered. He didn't need to chase the spotlight had found him. Even more damaging for Osteen, several of his longtime followers began posting publicly, saying they felt Kennedy had voiced the very concerns they'd been holding back for years. The narrative had flipped. The preacher who tried to silence was now the one being questioned, while the senator he tried to silence had become the voice of the people. It was more than just a clash. It was a turning point. John Kennedy wasted no time turning the viral moment into momentum. By sunrise, he was seated across from a national news anchor, the clip playing in the background as she asked him to explain what happened. Kennedy didn't grandstand. He leaned forward, speaking with the same steady calm he had shown on stage. "I wasn't trying to score points," Kennedy said. "I was trying to make it clear that people deserve the truth, not noise. You don't silence someone just because the truth makes you uncomfortable." The anchor nodded, visibly impressed. The clip spread again, this time with Kennedy's explanation attached, doubling its reach. Commentators praised his restraint, noting that he wasn't basking in victory but redirecting the focus to the audience, to the people who felt unheard. Meanwhile, Osteen stayed silent. His team urged him to release a statement, but every option seemed to fuel more criticism. Social media hashtags like #YouCan'tSilenceTruth and #KennedyClapback dominated trending lists. Memes painted Osteen as the polished speaker who lost control, while Kennedy was cast as the straight-talker who cut through the noise. For Kennedy, this wasn't just a viral clip anymore, it was a defining moment in his career. And every network wanted a piece of him. Behind the polished walls of his ministry, Joel Osteen was in turmoil. For years, he had managed every public appearance with precision, never allowing a moment to slip beyond his control. But now, one exchange with John Kennedy had unraveled it all. Staffers whispered nervously as Osteen paced his office, replaying the clip on a muted screen. Each time Kennedy's words rang out, "You can silence a microphone, but you can't silence accountability," Osteen's face tightened. He slammed the remote down, muttering that Kennedy had twisted the narrative. But outside his circle, the world didn't see it that way. Donations began to slow. Critical comments filled his live stream chats. Even his most loyal supporters admitted online that the senator had made valid points. For a man who thrived on universal applause, the silence from his base was louder than the cheers of any crowd. Meanwhile, Kennedy's momentum skyrocketed. Every talk show wanted him. Editorials praised him as a rare politician who could remain calm under pressure. His approval ratings ticked upward, fueled by voters who said he stood his ground without shouting. The contrast couldn't be sharper. Osteen, the man who once silenced others, now found himself isolated. Kennedy, the man who was supposed to be silenced, was speaking to the nation. And in that moment, Osteen realized, this wasn't just a bad night. It was the start of a reckoning. The pressure became unbearable. By the third day, Joel Osteen finally caved to his advisors and agreed to issue a public statement. Cameras were set up, the backdrop was polished, and Osteen stepped out with his signature smile. But this time, the smile looked forced, thinner, strained. "My goal," Osteen began softly, "has always been to uplift people, not to divide. I regret if my words were misunderstood during my exchange with Senator Kennedy. I believe in unity, and I respect anyone who fights for the people." The statement sounded careful, scripted, but the damage was already done. Within minutes, critics flooded social media, calling it empty and too little, too late. Others mocked the timing, comparing his polished apology to Kennedy's raw authenticity. On the other side, Kennedy was still riding the wave. When asked about Osteen's remarks, he didn't gloat. He simply replied, "This was never personal. It was about truth. And the truth will always outlast the spin." That one sentence was clipped, replayed, and shared across every platform. It drew a clear contrast. Osteen had to explain himself, while Kennedy simply stood on his words. The verdict from the public was clear. Osteen's attempt to silence Kennedy had backfired so completely that every step he took to recover only made Kennedy's victory shine brighter. The clash had started as a single moment on stage, but by the end of the week, it had reshaped the reputations of both men. Joel Osteen, once untouchable in his polished world of scripted messages, found himself on the defensive. His name was trending not for inspiration, but for being outmatched. Attendance at his events dipped, critics amplified, and even his supporters quietly admitted that Kennedy had exposed a side of him the public wasn't meant to see. John Kennedy, on the other hand, became the unexpected voice of accountability. His calm, razor-sharp lines were replayed endlessly, inspiring countless people who felt silenced in their own lives. Commentators praised him for standing firm without shouting, for letting truth cut deeper than theatrics. In a political climate dominated by noise, Kennedy's composure was a rare and refreshing contrast. The defining line, "You can silence a microphone, but you can't silence accountability," became more than just a viral quote. It was printed on shirts, posted on banners, and repeated in conversations across the country. Osteen had tried to silence him. But instead, he had handed Kennedy one of the most powerful moments of his career. And as the dust settled, the world remembered only one thing: the preacher's attempt to control the stage had failed, while the senator's truth had stolen the spotlight. Kennedy walked away not just with applause, but with a legacy moment that would follow him for years.